There's a type of crime that happens so silently, it feels like a perfect crime. No evidence, no clues, just a mystery. And today's case? It's exactly that. A strange story that starts with a tiny thread, and ends up exposing an entire life built on lies. Imagine someone living under your name, taking your house, your clothes, even your past. And the crazy part? No one figured it out, until a tiny watch stopped ticking. That little Rolex, frozen at a specific time and date, brought down a criminal who thought he had outsmarted everyone. But he forgot something. Sometimes, fate has its own way of exposing you, through the smallest of things. So, are you ready to hear today's story? Because thanks to a Rolex watch, and a bit of luck, a story was uncovered that no one would believe actually happened. Stick with me to the end, because the deeper we go into this case, the crazier it gets. Every new detail will leave you more shocked than the last. But before we dive in, I've got a small favor that would really help the channel. It won't cost you anything, just hit the like button and drop a comment on the last video. Your support has been amazing and it means the world. Let's keep this momentum going. And in return, I promise to keep giving you the best stories out there. Alright, let's get into it. On July 28, 1996, at around 5 a.m., two fishermen set out from Brixham Harbour in Devon, England. They headed toward a nearby coastal spot, hoping to catch something. But their first stop didn't go so well, no fish. So they decided to sail 6 more miles out into rougher waters, hoping for better luck. They reached an area known as the Roughs, a spot few fishermen ever go to. They dropped their nets and waited. About an hour later, they started pulling the nets back up, and something felt off. The net was way too heavy, like it was packed with fish. But when they finally hauled it up, what they found left them in shock. Right in the middle of the fish was a dead body. They panicked and immediately contacted the Coast Guard. Police rushed to the scene and confirmed it was indeed a body. This discovery kicked off one of the most complex and bizarre investigations ever. And here's where fate played its hand. A Rolex watch, stuck on the 22nd, was about to crack the case wide open. The police arrived and examined the body. Thanks to the salty seawater, the body was surprisingly well preserved. It was a man in his early 40s, wearing a long-sleeved shirt, brown shoes, and jeans. No ID, nothing in his pockets, except a Rolex watch on his wrist. The date on the watch? Frozen on the 22nd. The pockets were turned inside out, like someone had already searched him. At first, detectives thought maybe he had fallen off a boat. But there were no missing persons reports that matched. Then came the autopsy, and the results changed everything. The man had suffered severe injuries, including a deep head wound. And that wasn't all. There was a faded tattoo on his arm, but it was too unclear to make anything of it. Still, the detectives had one solid clue: that Rolex. You see, every authentic Rolex has a serial number that can lead investigators to its original owner. If this watch was real, it could be the break they needed. So, they carefully removed the watch and sent it to Rolex HQ in London. The company responded in just 2 days. And the answer? Yes, it was real. Even better, the owner had recently sent it in for servicing. The watch belonged to a man named Ronald Joseph Platt. That changed everything. Thanks to this watch, police finally had a name. They traced Ronald to a rental home in Chelmsford. The landlord said Ronald hadn't been seen in a while, but had left behind a contact number, in case someone needed to reach him. That number belonged to a man named David Davis. Police gave David a call. The officer who spoke to him said he couldn't quite read David's emotions. It was a phone call, after all. But David took the news about Ronald's death surprisingly calmly. Still, they needed to talk face to face. David agreed to come in and meet with the police. So, they had a quick chat with David, and right away, you could tell he was a classy, friendly guy, dressed sharp, speaking smoothly. When the officer asked him about Ronald, David said, "Ronald owed me some money so he could stay in France for a while." He said Ronald had then moved to Canada and stayed there for some time, and after that, they lost contact. At the end of the call, David calmly expressed his sadness about his friend's death and assured the police that Ronald didn't have any enemies. Based on David's words, the police thought maybe Ronald fell off a boat and hit his head on the dock. That could explain the head injury and ultimately his death. At that point, the police decided to close the case. But some formal procedures still needed to be completed before officially ending it. The officer handling the case tried calling David several times, but David didn't answer. So, he asked a colleague to find David's address and visit him to let him know to get in touch. The officer went to David's house. It was in a rural area with only a few houses, and there were no name signs on the doors. So he knocked on the first door he saw. An older couple answered, and when the officer asked about David Davis, their answer shocked him. They said, "No, you're mistaken. The person living next door isn't David Davis, it's Ronald Platt. David Davis is pretending to be Ronald Platt, the man who drowned in the sea." The officer was stunned by their answer. But he wanted to make sure, so he asked them to describe Ronald's appearance. To his surprise, they described David perfectly, the same guy the officer had seen before. That's when he realized something was seriously wrong. David was living as Ronald, hiding under someone else's identity, far away from everyone. The officer's suspicions grew stronger. He remembered how David didn't react much when he heard about Ronald's death. In fact, he seemed convinced that David was definitely involved and had a hand in the whole thing. So, just when the case was about to be closed, they suddenly had a prime suspect, and the investigation reopened. Like I told you at the start, luck played a big role here. Imagine if the officer had gone to the right house from the very beginning, the case would have been shut before it even started. But fate had other plans. What you're about to hear next is even crazier. The officer went back to question the older couple again and gathered more info from them. Ronald, or should I say David, was living there with his family. His wife was much younger, and they had 2 kids. After getting these details, the police went back to the fishermen who found Ronald's body. They told them that near the spot where they pulled up the body, there was a small dock, which belonged to one of their friends. The police contacted the dock's owner and asked him to bring it back ASAP, because that dock might be an important clue in the crime. Luckily, the guy still had it and handed it over to the police. From that point, the police started digging into Ronald's circle, looking into everyone he knew and interacted with. Their first stop was Ronald's old friend, Eileen. When they interviewed her, Eileen shared a lot about the relationship between Ronald and David. She said David was never normal from the start. She met David about 5 years before the whole thing happened, at an art gallery where she was working. David was just there checking out the paintings. When they met, they had a normal conversation. She said David was polite, with a smooth way of talking that made anyone want to chat with him. He was really good at moving from one topic to another. What surprised Eileen most was at the end of their talk, David made a strange offer. He asked her if she wanted a job with a much higher salary than she had at the time. He said, "Hey, since you love traveling and art, I have a big investment company, and I want you to be part of it." Eileen was excited and liked the idea, but before she could answer, she remembered she was supposed to travel with her boyfriend. And guess who her boyfriend was? None other than Ronald Platt. That's how the connection between David and Ronald started, with Eileen as the link. David then told Eileen, "Don't worry, I'll cover all travel costs for you and your boyfriend." From that moment on, David became her friend. And here's where Ronald comes back into the picture. Ronald was a simple guy, dreaming of a stable life. He wanted to move to Canada. He met with David several times, and they hung out together. Ronald was impressed by David right away. He loved David's confident personality and saw him as someone who could open big doors for him. Their friendship grew stronger fast. David even offered to hand over the company's management to Ronald and Eileen, giving them full control while he stayed in the background. When they asked David why, he said it was because he was just divorced and didn't want anything in his name, so his ex-wife couldn't claim it in court. So, he decided to put all his business under other people's names. The company was called Cavendish Corporation, a pretty fancy name. Everything David said sounded really convincing to Eileen and Ronald. They actually saw it as a great opportunity and decided to go for it. What made them trust him even more was that he seemed religious. He went to church a lot and prayed, according to their faith. That really made them feel comfortable trusting him. One day, Eileen and Ronald got invited to spend Christmas Eve with David and his daughter Noelle, back in 1992. On New Year's Eve, David sent gifts to Eileen and Ronald, 2 plane tickets to Canada. He told them it was a gift so they could go and start their new life there. Even though Eileen was happy, she asked how they'd manage in Canada without jobs or money. David assured them that as soon as he finished setting up his company, he'd get them working there right away. Ronald's dream was always to go to Canada, so he was really impressed by the offer. David sold it like it was a golden chance they couldn't miss. He kept hyping Canada and suddenly came up with another suggestion, and this is important. He said that to manage the business remotely from Canada, he'd make special company stamps for them to sign with. That way, even from Canada, he could sign checks and documents for them without needing them to do anything. But here's the weird part. What was David's real goal with all this? It felt like something was off, but nobody really knew what. What's certain is that David was super persuasive and could win any argument he got into. Anyway, Ronald and Eileen moved to Canada together in February 1993. What happened next was even stranger than all that. Once they arrived, they waited a long time for the jobs David promised, but nothing happened. David kept making excuses that he hadn't finished paperwork for the company yet, and convinced them to take any jobs they could find until he got things ready. But Eileen couldn't settle there. She couldn't find work and decided to go back to England after 5 months to attend her sister's wedding. She never came back to Canada. Ronald, on the other hand, stayed and held on to his dream. When David found out, he was really unhappy and immediately went to talk to Eileen, trying to convince her to return to Ronald, saying he didn't like seeing them apart. David kept pushing her to come back but she refused. Then, not long after, David packed all his stuff and left Harrogate, the same town Eileen lived in. From that moment, Eileen lost all contact with David. The only thing she had was his phone number, but he never answered. What she didn't know was that from that point on, David started calling himself Ronald Platt, living his friend's life, using his name for 3 whole years. During that time, the real Ronald and Eileen lost contact completely and knew nothing about what was going on. Meanwhile, fishermen found Ronald's body in the sea in July 1997. Around that time, David contacted Eileen again, just a few months after the police found Ronald's body. He told her some strange things about what happened to Ronald, though he never explained much. When the police reached out to Eileen, she confirmed that David had contacted her but hadn't said anything about what happened to Ronald. That raised more suspicions about David. Then one day, out of the blue, David called Eileen and asked to meet. Eileen got really scared, especially since she suspected he was involved in Ronald's death, but she stayed calm and agreed to meet him, trying not to show any fear in case he was dangerous. She told him, "Okay, let's meet for coffee at a cafe near my work." David showed up that day, they drank coffee, and he told her about what happened to Ronald. Eileen said he seemed fake, like he was pretending to be sad. His words felt shallow, like he was acting, but she played along, pretending to believe him. After they finished talking, David said goodbye and told her he'd take a train to Chelmsford Station and then go home. As soon as he left, Eileen called the police and told them where he was going. The police went to the station to wait for him, but after a long time, it turned out David never got off the train. In fact, he hadn't even gotten on it at all. The next morning, the officers went to his house again and found someone moving around. They recognized him as David. They watched him closely and called for backup before confronting him because they were afraid he might be armed. He was the prime suspect in the case. Before backup arrived, David left the house, grabbed a taxi, and police followed him. They stopped the taxi and asked the driver for his license so David wouldn't get suspicious. Then they asked David to get out of the car. The weird thing is, when David got out of the car, he was super calm and cooperative with the cops, like nothing really bothered him. When they told him he was under arrest and had to go with them to the station, he was actually polite and said, "I'm at your service." Before they put him in the car, they started searching him and found something really strange. He had 2 IDs on him. One said David Davies, and the other said Ronald Platts. To be 100% sure he was pretending to be Ronald's friend, they took him straight to the station. But there was still one big problem: no solid proof that he actually killed Ronald. David didn't confess to anything, and he stayed completely quiet. The police took his fingerprints and sent them to the database to gather all his info. During the investigation, David was very cooperative, answering politely and respectfully. They didn't stop there, they went to his house and took his wife in for questioning too. Which, by the way, was supposed to be his wife, Dakika. I told you this case is really strange, and now you'll see why. 2 officers stayed at the house and searched every inch. They noticed several photos on David's desk showing him standing on his yacht. The weird part? The yacht didn't seem to exist. But the police didn't give up and kept following the evidence until they finally found the yacht. It wasn't far, it was docked at a marina near Ronald's house. When they boarded the yacht and searched it, that's when the biggest shock hit. There were bloodstains and hair scattered everywhere. On top of that, they found a bag from a marine supply store. They checked the fingerprints on the bag and they matched Ronald's exactly. The police went to the store to get more details. The owner told them 2 guys came to buy an anchor from him. When the police saw the anchor they bought, they realized it was the same one the fishermen found in the sea with Ronald's body. The medical examiner confirmed that the blow on Ronald's head was from that anchor. At this point, the detectives were starting to connect the dots, but then Interpol sent them a report that shocked them like crazy. After sending David's fingerprints, Interpol told them that the guy they arrested wasn't actually David Davies. The guy's real name was Albert Johnson, one of the most wanted criminals in Canada. Wait, story time, who is this new guy? Albert was living a normal life, married with kids. But he had money problems and got divorced. He worked at a company and embezzled 3.5 million Canadian dollars. Then he told his kids he was going on a trip, took his little daughter, and never came back. Now, about the David Davies identity he stole, that was actually a real investor in the same company Albert worked for, and Albert managed to fake his identity just like that. So why did he do all this? Why kill Ronald, steal his identity, and also take on someone else's identity? The truth is, Albert needed a new identity to hide after settling in England, to escape danger and enjoy the stolen money. When Albert went to England and met Ronald for the first time, he saw an easy chance to disappear and avoid the law. That's why when he helped Ronald and Eileen travel, he was able to get Ronald's identity details, birth date, address, even his signature stamp, which he convinced them to make a copy of. After Ronald traveled, Albert got a new ID in Ronald's name because back then, renewing IDs wasn't so strict. He bought a house in England and lived there with who he said was his wife, but it was actually his daughter, Shane, who was 18. Like I said, everything about this story is bizarre. But the whole plan started to fall apart when the real Ronald came back from England. Suddenly, there were 2 Ronalds, and one had to disappear. You probably know what happened next. Albert decided to end his friend's life on the boat in the middle of the sea. He hit him on the head with the anchor, killed him, and then dumped him in the water. Up to that point, Albert's plan was working perfectly. But he didn't know that a Rolex watch and a bit of luck would expose his evil plan completely. One of the strangest cases I've ever seen was finally solved. Justice was served, even if late. Albert's trial didn't take more than 2 hours, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Seriously, one of the craziest crime stories I've come across, and how everything fell into place by a strange coincidence. That's the end of the story. Thanks so much for sticking with me this far. If you have any crime stories or cases you want me to tell in upcoming videos, drop them in the comments. I'll make a video about them. See you next time.